Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The Lancaster Manor shone brightly under the crystal chandeliers, each reflection dancing on the gilded walls. Guests, dressed in elegant attire, mingled around sumptuously set tables, discussing business, politics, and the arts with politely ironic smiles. But amidst this opulence, a simple, almost invisible presence unwittingly caught the eye of some. Clara, a 17-year-old girl, sat on a small bench at the back of the great hall. The only child of Margaret, the manor's devoted waitress, she had grown up in the shadow of the grandeur of Edward Lancaster, the eccentric and demanding billionaire. The guests hardly noticed her, considering her a mere servant's child, insignificant in this world of luxury. Yet Edward, always attentive to details and hidden talents, sensed something unusual in her attitude. He approached her, his heavy footsteps echoing on the polished parquet floor, and looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and defiance. "Clara," he said in a calm but authoritative voice, "I would like you to play the violin for our guests tonight." The girl jumped slightly. The murmurs of the guests around her seemed to die away, replaced by a palpable tension. She had never faced such a challenge in front of such a prestigious audience. Yet, a faint smile touched her lips. She had practiced in secret since childhood, hiding her true talent from the world. As she placed the violin under her chin and ran her bow over the strings, a pure, crystal clear, and deep sound filled the room. The murmurs instantly fell silent, replaced by an admiring hush. Each note seemed to strike directly at the heartstrings of the guests, and even the usually imperturbable Edward felt a shiver run down his spine. The stunned guests slowly rose, unable to look away from the young prodigy. Clara acted as if she were telling a story, a mixture of pain, beauty, and mastery that no one suspected. At that precise moment, it became clear to everyone that this girl, who came from a humble background and had hidden behind the servants, possessed a gift that could turn the world they lived in upside down. And Edward, looking at her, understood that tonight would not just be a musical performance, it would be the beginning of a revelation that would change his life, and Clara's, forever. The day after the gala, Lancaster Manor seemed eerily quiet. The guests had left, but the atmosphere of the previous evening still hung in the halls, like a faint but lingering scent. Edward Lancaster, sitting in his study, its walls lined with bookcases filled with rare books, couldn't help but think back to Clara's performance. Clara's mother, Margaret, entered the office timidly, wearing her impeccable waitress uniform. She lowered her eyes respectfully, but a slight tremor in her voice betrayed her concern. "Mr. Lancaster, I just wanted to thank you," she began hesitantly, "for giving Clara the opportunity to perform last night." Edward looked up from his papers and studied her closely. His mind wasn't on gratitude, he was fascinated by the control and emotion the girl had exuded. "Margaret, I have to ask you," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "has Clara always studied the violin?" The maid shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "No, sir. She learned in secret. I always believed that one day she would have the chance to showcase her talent, but I never thought it would be here, in front of so many people." Edward frowned slightly, intrigued. He stood up and walked over to the large bay window of his office, looking out over the manicured gardens of the manor. "Secretly," he muttered to himself. "Such mastery, at this age, and hidden from everyone." Margaret nodded, visibly moved. "She's quiet, but she works hard. This is her refuge, her world." Edward turned to her with a calculated but sincere smile. "Margaret, tomorrow I would like Clara to come to my office. I wish to speak with her, alone. It's time I found out who she really is." The maid seemed hesitant, but finally agreed. "Of course, sir. I'll make sure she comes." As she left the room, Edward remained thoughtful, stroking her chin. What he had heard and seen yesterday was unlike anything he had experienced in his life as a billionaire surrounded by prodigies and celebrities. Clara wasn't just a waitress's daughter, she was an enigma, a raw talent that needed to be explored. And somewhere in the manor, Clara, unaware of what lay ahead, practiced her violin with the same silent passion as the day before, unaware that her life was about to change forever. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn, as usual. Pale sunlight filtered through the curtains of the small bedroom she shared with her mother. The violin lay on her bed, its bow carefully placed beside it. Since the gala, she hadn't stopped thinking about the looks on the guests' faces, the astonishment that had crossed their faces. Shortly after breakfast, Margaret knocked softly on her door. "Clara. Mr. Lancaster wishes to see you in his study." Now. Clara felt her heart race. She had never been called into the billionaire's office, let alone. Trembling but determined, she grabbed her violin and followed her mother to the office. Edward Lancaster sat behind his large mahogany desk, his face serious but curious. When Clara entered, he stood and stared at her, as if trying to penetrate her mind. "Clara," he said slowly. "Last night, you played, and you surprised everyone. Even me." Clara looked down, a mixture of shyness and pride in her voice. "Thank you, Mr. Lancaster. I'm doing my best." Edward paced around the desk, observing the girl's every move. "It's not a question of doing your best. What you played yesterday, that was exceptional." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. She hadn't expected such a compliment from a man known for being demanding and hard to impress. "I want you to understand something, Clara," Edward continued, his voice deepening. "This talent you possess, it's rare. Very rare. And it must not remain hidden." Clara finally looked up, a mixture of disbelief and hope. You want me to play for you?" she asked timidly. Edward smiled slightly. "More than that. I want to help you develop that talent. I want you to come out of the shadows and let the world see what you can do. But for that to happen, you'll have to trust me, and accept that your life will change." Clara's heart was pounding. She never imagined that a man like Edward Lancaster could be so interested in her. Part of her wanted to say no, to stay quiet and continue her quiet life, but another, deeper part burned with excitement and curiosity. After a charged silence, she nodded. "Okay, Mr. Lancaster. I trust you." Edward walked over and extended his hand. "Then welcome to a new life, Clara." Clara took his hand, aware that, in one way or another, her life had changed. And in that silent room, an invisible pact was formed, the beginning of a journey that would take her far beyond anything she had ever imagined. The next morning, Clara arrived at Edward's office, her violin carefully stored in its case. The atmosphere was different from the day before. The walls, paintings, and trophies seemed to be watching the young girl with an almost lifelike intensity. Edward greeted her with a more relaxed smile than the day before, but his gaze remained scrutinizing. "Today we're going to start seriously," he said, sitting down behind his desk. "I want to understand your real level." Clara opened her case and adjusted the violin under her chin. The first notes she played were soft, precise, almost timid. Edward listened to her attentively, sometimes nodding, sometimes frowning. "You have talent," he finally admitted. "But you lack technique in certain passages. And your posture." He stood up and took a few steps toward her. "The bow should glide, not fall. Your left hand should breathe with the strings." Clara listened, attentive and focused, but a small part of her felt intimidated. She'd never had a teacher who could correct every detail with such rigor. Yet, something in Edward's attitude pushed her to excel. "One more time," he said. "And this time, listen to every note you produce. Imagine that each sound tells a story." When she started again, the melody sounded different. Livelier, more emotional. Edward crossed his arms, impressed despite himself. Not bad at all," he murmured, almost to himself. "But what you play isn't entirely you yet. You have to find your identity in the music." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. She understood that what this billionaire demanded of her was not simply technical perfection, but emotional depth, an artistry that went far beyond mere notes. After several hours, exhausted but excited, she put away her violin. Edward watched her, a mixture of admiration and calculation on his face. "You're progressing quickly," he said. "But know that what we're starting here won't stay secret for long. The world will eventually know what you're worth." Clara nodded, knowing that this adventure would push her far beyond her limits, and that every note she played could change her life irreversibly. As she left the office, an idea dawned on her: maybe she wasn't just destined to remain in the shadows. Maybe the world was finally ready to hear her music. A few days later, Edward told Clara that she would be performing for a small, select group of guests in the Manor's living room. It would be her first performance outside of the gala, but in a more intimate setting. Clara felt her stomach sink. She had never performed in front of a real audience that wasn't made up of members of her family or close circle. The mansion's living room was meticulously decorated, velvet armchairs for guests, scented candles, and a small platform where Clara would stand. The guests were influential figures, art critics, patrons, and a few of Lancaster's close associates. All were aware of the billionaire's reputation, but none suspected the true talent of the young woman who would perform tonight. Edward approached her before she took the stage. "Clara, what you'll be playing tonight isn't just music. It's a story. Every note you play must touch someone here." Clara nodded, gripping her bow. As she took her place on the stage, the murmurs died down. Eyes were fixed on her, some curious, others skeptical. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment, concentrating on the melody she had practiced tirelessly. The first notes rose in the living room. Soft yet powerful, they filled the space with an almost palpable emotion. Soon, the guests were mesmerized, some held their breath, others closed their eyes, transported by the music. Suddenly, a muffled laugh was heard from a corner of the room. A particularly arrogant guest, thinking to discredit the young girl, murmured, "What can a servant's daughter possibly know about music?" Clara didn't let anything show. She continued playing, and each note seemed to answer that silent doubt. The guest's hands trembled slightly, and his mocking smile disappeared. Everyone in the room began to feel what Edward had already understood: Clara wasn't just gifted, she was exceptional. When the last note died away, there was complete silence. Then thunderous applause erupted. The critics, skeptical at first, leaned forward in wonder. Edward, standing beside her, smiled proudly and contentedly. Clara, her cheeks flushed but her heart light, realized something: this was only the beginning. The world was beginning to see the truth. She was no longer just the waitress's daughter, she was a prodigy who would soon change her life, and perhaps the lives of everyone around her. A few weeks after her first private performance, Clara began to make a name for herself in Edward's artistic circle. Invitations to perform for patrons and critics multiplied, and her reputation grew at a surprising rate. But with this recognition also came envy and jealousy. Inside the mansion, some staff members and even a few guest artists eyed Clara with suspicion. Among them was Vanessa, a talented but arrogant pianist accustomed to receiving all the attention at Lancaster events. Vanessa couldn't stand it when a young girl, a member of the staff, stole the show. "Did you hear about Clara's latest performance?" Vanessa called out to her friends at a rehearsal. "It seems like she's got everyone under her spell, and for what? Just because she can ring a few notes from her violin." Clara, for her part, still ignored these whispers. She focused on her daily training with Edward, who constantly pushed her to surpass her limits. "You have to feel the music in your veins, not just in your fingers," he repeated over and over again. "It's this emotion that makes all the difference between a musician and a true artist." One evening, Edward held a rehearsal with influential guests. Clara took the stage, ready to perform. As she began, Vanessa, sitting among the audience, stared at her with a mixture of contempt and defiance. Clara sensed a slight tension in the air, but she ignored the urge to be disturbed. Every note she played seemed to silently challenge those who doubted her. At the end of the play, applause erupted, this time even louder than during her first performance. Even Vanessa, unable to deny Clara's talent, looked away, flushed with shame and envy. Edward walked up to Clara after the performance, his smile proud and encouraging. See? It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, what matters is what you can do and how you feel. Keep it up, and you'll go far. Clara felt a mixture of relief and pride. She understood that her path would not be easy, but that every obstacle would be an opportunity to prove her worth. And as she left the stage, an idea took root in her mind: she would never let the jealousy of others stop her. She had a talent that no one could take away from her. In the following weeks, Clara's fame only grew. Performances at Lancaster Manor now attracted not only patrons and critics, but also journalists and bloggers specializing in classical music. Edward, ever present at her side, ensured that Clara was protected while opening new doors for her. One morning, while she was rehearsing in the Great Hall, Edward entered with a thick envelope in his hand. "Clara, look at this," he said, handing her the document. Clara hesitantly opened it. Inside was an invitation to participate in a prestigious international music competition, known for revealing young prodigies to the world. Her eyes widened. Is this real?" she whispered, almost incredulously. Edward nodded, a proud smile on his face. "Yes. And I want you to enter. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But know that this competition won't be easy. There will be competitors from all over the world, all incredibly talented." Clara felt a mixture of excitement and fear. For the first time, she was about to leave the safe cocoon of the manor and compete against artists who might even be better than her. But an inner force pushed her to accept. "All right. I will," she said finally, determined. The following days were spent in intense preparation. Edward corrected every detail, adjusted every movement of the bow, and emphasized the emotional expression behind every note. Clara discovered a discipline and endurance she hadn't suspected, while feeling a growing bond with Edward, who no longer saw her as just a student, but as a true protégé and prodigy. The evening before leaving for the competition, Clara strolled through the manor gardens, violin in hand. She remembered the astonished looks of the guests at her first performance, the whispers of jealousy, but above all, Edward's constant support. One certainty now inhabited her: no matter the obstacles, she was ready to show the world who she really was. And as the sun set behind the large bay windows, illuminating the manor with golden hues, Clara realized that her life had just crossed a new threshold. The shadow of the past remained behind her, and the future, uncertain but promising, eagerly awaited her. Clara finally arrived at the large concert hall of the international competition. The place was majestic, with a polished wooden stage, glittering chandeliers, and rows of seats filled with an eager and knowledgeable audience. Around her, other young prodigies from around the world were rehearsing, some with disconcerting confidence, others with nervousness visible on their faces. Edward was at her side, carefully observing every detail. "Clara, remember, what you did here and at the manor was just a warm-up. Here, every note counts. But above all, play with your heart, not your head." Clara nodded, clutching her violin like a talisman. She knew this moment could change her life, but she also felt the pressure mounting. When her name was called, she took the stage, the audience scrutinizing her curiously. Among the competitors, she spotted Vanessa, the arrogant pianist who already seemed to want to intimidate her with her contemptuous gaze. Clara felt a shiver of apprehension, but she remembered Edward's words: "Play with your heart." She took a deep breath and placed the bow on the strings. The first notes rose, pure and powerful, filling the room with raw emotion. With each difficult passage, Clara felt the tension increase, but she managed to transform this pressure into intensity, captivating the audience. Vanessa frowned, unable to deny Clara's excellence. The judges, seated in the front row, took attentive notes, impressed by the young violinist's mastery and emotion. As the last note faded, there was complete silence before applause erupted, louder than anything Clara had heard before. Some members of the audience rose, moved by the performance of the young girl who had just emerged from the shadows. Edward stepped into the wings, his eyes shining with pride. "You've done it, Clara. But this is only the beginning. Here, you'll meet more experienced rivals, and some will try to unsettle you." Clara, her heart pounding, understood that her path would be strewn with pitfalls. But she felt a new strength within her. She had crossed a threshold, and from now on, no one would be able to ignore her talent. This competition was not just a test, it was the beginning of a true journey towards recognition and glory. On the second day of the competition, Clara felt the pressure mounting even more. The performances of the other competitors were impressive, some capable of playing with near-perfect technique, but often devoid of emotion. Clara, for her part, knew that her strong point was precisely this ability to touch hearts. Backstage, she met a young Italian violinist named Isabella. Unlike Vanessa, Isabella showed no signs of arrogance. On the contrary, she approached Clara with a warm smile. "You play beautifully," she said softly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I think we can learn from each other." Clara was surprised by this approach. Usually, she was wary of her rivals. But something about Isabella's attitude seemed genuine. They decided to support each other, exchanging tips on technique, breathing, and emotional expression. Clara realized that some alliances could be more valuable than any competition. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued her attempts to intimidate Clara. She made sarcastic comments in front of the other contestants and sent defiant looks. But Clara, strengthened by her newfound bond with Isabella and the confidence Edward had instilled in her, remained undeterred. During the afternoon, while rehearsing in a secluded room, Clara made a surprising discovery: an old manuscript of sheet music, forgotten on a music stand. The notes seemed ancient, and the melody promised to be spectacular if performed correctly. Excited, Clara showed the manuscript to Edward. "Look at this. These scores, they're incredible. I've never seen anything like them." Edward examined the document, his eyes shining with curiosity. "It's a rare masterpiece. If you can play it well, it could set you apart even more. But be warned, it's not easy. It will take courage, precision, and a lot of emotion." Clara felt her heart race. It was a unique opportunity, but also a huge challenge. She understood that this competition was not just a technical challenge, but a test of her musical soul. And for the first time, she felt that something bigger awaited her, something that could change her career forever. The night of the finals approached, and Clara stood backstage, the ancient manuscript before her. Her heart was pounding. She had never faced a challenge of this magnitude. Every note seemed to hold a secret, every bar demanded a precision and emotion she had never experienced before. Isabella, at her side, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You can do this, Clara. Focus on the music, not the fear." Clara nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew everything she'd learned from Edward, discipline, passion, trust, was going to be put to the test tonight. When her name was announced, she took the stage. The silence in the room was palpable. The judges' faces, stern and attentive, stared at her with an intensity that could have unsettled anyone. Even Vanessa, sitting in the front row, wore a smug smile, confident that Clara couldn't rise to the challenge. Clara placed the violin under her chin and began to play. The first notes were hesitant, but soon she let the music guide her. Every movement of the bow, every vibration of the string told a story, a mixture of passion, pain, and triumph. The melody seemed to fill the entire room, touching everyone present. As she progressed through the score, murmurs of admiration could be heard from the audience. The usually impassive judges leaned forward, captivated by the young prodigy's performance. Even Vanessa, usually so confident, looked away, unable to hide her astonishment. As the last note sounded and faded, a shocked silence enveloped the room before applause erupted, louder and longer than anything Clara had experienced before. People rose to their feet, cheering her performance. Edward, standing in the wings, his eyes shining with pride, felt a deep emotion wash over him. Clara, her cheeks flushed but her heart light, realized that tonight she had proven not only her talent, but also her inner strength. She was no longer just the waitress's daughter or Edward's protégée, she was an artist in her own right, capable of captivating and moving the world. As she stepped off the stage, Isabella joined her, beaming. "You did it, Clara. You really did. No one will ever forget what you just did. Clara smiled, knowing this was only the beginning. The road to global recognition was still long, but tonight she had crossed a threshold that no one could erase. The day after the final, the competition hall was alive with discussion, rumors, and speculation. Clara sat in a small dressing room, her violin perched on her lap, still reeling from her performance the day before. Her heart was still pounding, but a newfound serenity had settled over her. Edward entered, a broad smile on his face. "Clara," he said, his voice trembling with pride. "You not only impressed the judges, but you also touched everyone present. What you accomplished yesterday was exceptional." Clara smiled shyly. "I could never have done it without your help, Mr. Lancaster." Edward shook his head. "No, Clara. You had it all within you. I only helped you unlock your potential. This triumph is entirely yours." Shortly after, the judges officially announced the results. Clara won first prize, a prestigious trophy, and an invitation to perform in several international concerts. Emotions rose through her like a torrent. She had proven to the world that she was an exceptional artist, but more importantly, she had proven to herself that she could surpass any limits she had ever imagined. Vanessa, who was in the room, approached timidly. "Clara. I've never seen anyone play like that," she stammered. Clara looked at her, a mixture of compassion and pride in her eyes. She understood that even her rivals could learn and recognize the value of others. A few hours later, in the restored calm of Lancaster Manor, Clara and Edward strolled through the gardens. The flowers, bathed in the twilight light, seemed to celebrate their success. "Edward," Clara said softly. "What's next for me?" Edward smiled thoughtfully. "Clara, this is just the beginning. The world is waiting for you, and I know you'll do wonders. But know one thing, your life will never be the same. Challenges, jealousies, surprises, all of it is happening now. And I will be there to guide you." Clara looked up at the orange evening sky, feeling a new strength fill her. She was no longer just a waitress's daughter. She was a renowned artist, a prodigy whose talent would touch lives, inspire and move. And for the first time, she fully accepted that her life had just changed, forever. As she clutched her violin, Clara knew she was ready to face whatever the future held with passion, courage, and determination.